You set foot on foreign soil. Only this land isn't ruled by any country or government. In this land we celebrate music. In this land we celebrate games. In this land we celebrate those who compose video game music. Welcome to the VG Embassy. Welcome everyone, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the VG Embassy. This is a show centered around video game music and the amazing online community of fans and podcasters that enjoy it. My name's Ed, and on each episode I'll take the role of the prime VGM minister and invite a guest VG ambassador onto the show to share with us their own video game music culture, or I might share a part of my culture on a solo show. Today's episode is episode 7, the Dyad Challenge, and if that name kind of clues you in a little bit, I have a VG ambassador with me today, the Dyad from The Dyad Presents, a VGM podcast. Ben, how are you? We've been talking about this show for a while, and I'm so happy to finally have you on as a VG ambassador.
I'm doing great, and I'm super happy to be here, especially with this new gig you've got going. I'm obviously, at this time of recording, no shows have come out yet,
right?
So I am full of anticipation to hear how they turn out.
Yeah, so this show, we're recording it early June, and it's probably going to be released around August time. So we're doing a little time traveling. So we have prepared a really unique show today. We were kind of talking about what kind of show we wanted to do together, and Ben came up with a really good idea. So why don't you kind of describe the kind of podcast that you designed for this episode?
Sure. So if anyone out there in podcast land is familiar with my own show, I have sort of carved out a little niche for myself, which is what I've started calling edutainment. And I will listen to video game music, of course, but I will also pepper in anecdotes, trivia, history, things that I think are interesting, and they are sometimes related to video games, but not necessarily. And so for the Dyad Challenge, we have each picked a few tracks, and the opposite person is going to need to do some research on the other person's tracks and see what they come up with.
Yeah, exactly. So we're kind of surprising each other here. So Ben's picked 4 tracks, 4 video game music tracks. They were all incredible. And so my challenge was to find tangential research, so things not directly related to the game, but something that might remind us of something that might remind us of something, to do some research and to educate each other, and by proxy, the listeners, for a little like educational segment. So Ben's got a whole bunch of research done on tracks that I've picked for the show, so I'm really excited to see what he came up with. I'm sure you're looking forward to see what I came up with. I think we're going to have a really good time here.
It sounds like some sort of challenge.
A Dyad Challenge. And yeah, if you guys like this, definitely let us know, and we will make this maybe a semi-regular thing on the VG Embassy. That would be a lot of fun. Maybe adding new people into the mix to torture with research subjects. So without further ado, let's get into our first track. Ben, why don't you go first? What's the first song you want to play today?
Okay, so up first is going to be from a game called Gimmick. It came out on the Famicom/NES, and depending on which system, it was released on 92 or 1993, and composed by Masashi Kageyama. The track that I've picked first is Good Night, Take 2.
All right, that was Good Night Take Two, also known as the Good Ending, from Gimmick, which came out on the Famicom and the NES in 92 and 93, composed by Masashi Kageyama. I don't think there's a single dud track on this entire soundtrack. It's probably one of the best NES/Famicom soundtracks ever made.
Definitely. Yeah, it's just like pound for pound, possibly the greatest soundtrack on the NES Famicom. And I think this track in particular is just like pure pop song.
Oh, for sure. It's got some great little like jazz licks and little like solo areas, and like you were doing little vocal things while we were listening to it. It's a very lyrical song. I can definitely, picture like a 1988 MTV video with lots of dancers and like a very, flashy kind of a stage set, and this song playing in the background.
Oh yeah, it's begging for a VGM karaoke to all you budding musicians out there.
Yeah, this one's going to take some range, though, I think, to hit those high notes, to get a lot of that vibrato going on. There's a lot of good stuff here to sing to. So
a lot of range or a lot of courage?
A little of both.
Yeah, man, that's right.
If you
that's
don't
fair.
have the range, I think the less range you have, the more courage it's going to take.
Exactly.
Yeah, man, that's absolutely crazy stuff. I've always loved the Gimmick soundtrack, and the game is cool too. It's one of those games that only came out in Japan and I think like Scandinavia, and you play as this little green alien-looking character called Yumetaro. He's basically a toy that was given to a little girl, and the little girl's other toys get really jealous of Yumetaro because Yumetaro is the girl's favorite toy. And so they kidnap her and bring her to a different dimension. And the gameplay is like really interesting. Have you played this game before?
I have not played it, but I've watched entire Let's Plays of it. There was one notable one by, I want to say maybe Frank Cifaldi, some video game journalist who had a notated Let's Play many years ago and kind of talked about some of the technical aspects and everything. And it looks super fun, but I've heard it's really, really crazy hard.
Yeah, there are some people that think it's really easy and some people that think it's really hard. And the whole concept of the game is that you have this kind of like star block, and you need to throw it and reflect it off of different surfaces to destroy enemies, to kind of jump on to help you get over pits and spikes. And so it requires a whole lot of kind of tactical thought along with your platforming to be able to get really, really good at the game. Almost kind of like you're playing pool, because you have to like hit the angle and then jump, and then as it's like reflecting off another surface, jump on the star block to get it to have you like leap over a big pit or something.
It's like a proto-precision platformer.
PPP.
Exactly.
I like it. Exactly. So, speaking of pool, or billiards, or, more correctly known nowadays as cue sports. Cue sports is a series of games in which players strike solid balls with a cue stick, using angles and momentum to score points. Now, some games require you to sink the balls in pockets lined around the table, and others score based on the number of contacts the ball makes with the table and where it lies after it stops. The sport has been around since the 1340s, and it began as an outdoor game for nobility in France. The first known indoor table was owned by King Louis XI of France, and subsequent kings actually helped to refine the sport into what we know today. And the best billiards story that I know of, well, best and worst depending on your opinion of the whole thing, but Mary Queen of Scots was noted as complaining on record that her billiard table had been taken from her. And later the very same people that performed her execution, who also took her billiard table, covered her body with the cloth that used to cover her billiard table. Wow. I was like, I thought that was so...
That is some insult to injury stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty gruesome, but it's so cool that, like, the sport has this kind of, like, infamous, place in this, like, really gruesome part of history. So I play pool a lot, and I really enjoy it. I used to do it so much with my friends. I don't get out as much to do it nowadays, but I think if you're really good at pool, you can kind of maybe help yourself excel at Gimmick a little bit, just because knowing angles and how things kind of react when they bump into each other is kind of like a natural skill that you need to have when you play Gimmick.
Yeah, action geometry.
Action, geometry at work.
You know, I had never heard the term Q sports before.
Yeah, I guess that's internationally what it's known as now. So when you watch a game of pool on TV, you know, competitive championship pool, they like pool and billiards and all those other kind of table sports, they're all known as cue sports because really the only thing they have in common is that you play with a cue, and then the rules are all completely different other than that. Some have pockets, some don't. So actually the sport croquet was an offshoot of pool because of how pool started as a outdoor sports game. They started adding the wickets and the hoops that you have to shoot the balls through. And so like one part of that sport kind of branched off into what became croquet and cricket and some of those other lawn games. And then another faction kind of took it inside and started refining it as part of cue sports and billiards. So it was interesting to see how those sports are all kind of related to each other, and they all came out of Europe.
I'm giving you what can be only described as thoughtful nods.
It's really interesting.
I agree.
And now that I know more about the sport, I feel like I have a little bit more of an appreciation for it. So,
and you can tell people the next time you're playing one of your cue sports all about the history.
Exactly. I can bore them to death. Did you know in the 1340s,
right.
It'll be like, you're buying the next drink.
And once you've bored them to death, you can cover them with the cloth of the billiards table.
Perfect. An excellent death shroud. All right. So, ready to go on to the next track?
I'm ready.
All right. So this is my pick for Ben. And so the first one I've picked for the show today is from the CD version of Flashback. And this one is called Diary. And this is composed by Fabrice Vissereau, Jean Badois, Marc Minier, Patrick Sigwalt, Pierre-André Athan, and Pascal Perrino. And I know my French sucks, so please forgive me for those pronunciations. This came out on the PC, the Sega CD, the Amiga CD, a whole bunch of CD systems around 1994. And let's take a listen. All right, welcome back. That was Diary, the CD version, from the CD version of Flashback, which came out in 1994, composed by Fabrice Vissereau, Jean Badois, Marc Minier, Patrick Sigwalt, Pierre-André Athan, and Pascal Perrino. I love this game, and I've always only played the Genesis version. That was the game I owned when I was a kid. I remember being super duper excited for this game to come out. Probably one of the first games where I was like really wanted to like pre-order it. It just looked so cool. And I remember going to Funko Land to buy it like on release day. And I asked the guy behind the counter, I was like, should I get the Super Nintendo version or should I get the Genesis version? Because I had both consoles at the time. And the guy was really honest. He was like, well, the Super Nintendo version is much more colorful. And the music might be a little bit better, but it's a lot slower. The Genesis version it's got a faster processor, the animation's a little more smooth, and so it plays a little bit better. So I made the mature choice, as I was kind of more of a Super Nintendo fanboy, but I got the Genesis version, and I to this day believe that I made the right choice because I loved that game so much, and I never played the CD version. So when I discovered the CD soundtrack, I was like, oh my god, this is mind-blowing. How did I never know about this music?
Well, you know that the game was actually designed for the Genesis.
I did, yeah, and I think that's what the guy told me too, that it was just ported to all the other systems, but it's come out on like every single system that displays on a TV.
Yep.
I think you can get flashback for at this point.
It came out first on the Amiga. They beat the Genesis to market for whatever reason.
Okay.
Which has an alternate soundtrack, I read, but it was designed for the Genesis. I wasn't sure if you had actually played this game. I didn't want to ask you any questions. I don't want it to cloud my research. But so from what I was learning about this game, it is very much like Prince of Persia. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's designed by a team that was very close to the Prince of Persia design team.
Mm-hmm.
You can climb up on walls and stuff, but instead of swordplay, you've got a gun.
Right.
So it's more ranged combat and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it has the rotoscoping pixel art as well. For those of you out there in podcast land that don't know what rotoscoping is, it is a animation technique that the animators basically trace over live action footage frame by frame, so you get a realistic fluidity, but you keep the pixels and kind of more gamey look, I would say. When they first developed the technique, animators would project photographs of like live action images onto glass panels and just trace over the images, which is where the name rotoscope comes from.
Yes, sir. I remember there's a really old Superman cartoon from the 40s or the 50s, I think, that used rotoscoping, and it was really, really impressive. And I think a lot of Disney cartoons from back then, like Cinderella and Snow White, use the rotoscoping technique as well.
Yep, I believe you're right. I know there's a very famous looping animation of a horse galloping, but I don't know what it's called. I just happened to see it a few times when I was digging around at rotoscoping. When you were going through the battery of French composers to this game, the only one that I was familiar with was Jean Badlow, because he composed the soundtrack to a James Bond game that I had played on my own podcast way back in my episode 007. It was a game called Operation Stealth that came out for the Amiga. It was a point-and-click adventure game, also from Delphine Software, who developed the game, and they ended up renaming it in North America as James Bond 007 The Stealth Affair. So this game also was developed by Delphine Software, which was a French company, and it was published by UK Gold, which was a British company. There was a sequel that came out at some point. Did you play that at all?
The flashback sequel that it was more like a 3D, a Fade to Black, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm, yep, this is a 3D sequel called Fade to Black.
I played it briefly. I wasn't as impressed with it as I was Flashback. It was a little stiff and blocky feeling.
Uh-huh.
But I did play it a little bit. But there was a remake that came out recently on the Xbox 360, I think, which was like a reboot of the original Flashback game, but with updated graphics and feel.
Mm-hmm, yeah. The sequel was apparently supposed to be released on a whole bunch more consoles, and maybe just because of the tepid response, they kind of scrapped it. But they are getting a re-release in 2018 on Dreamcast as Flashback 2 Fade to Black. And if you're sitting there scratching your head and saying, did he just say a Dreamcast release in 2018? That's right, my friend, because there is a company called Josh Prod, which released the original game for Dreamcast in 2017, who is a French publisher of, I guess, just basically passed over Dreamcast titles. I went to his website to try and find out a little bit more information about him, which is, I think it's just joshprod.com, and all it is a looping flash animation with his contact information. There is a list of his titles that he's releasing, I found on some third-party site, but I couldn't even find any of the games to buy, so I had to go to his Facebook page, which linked to an external site that actually sells the software. So if you want to relive Flashback, for $39.99, you can get a Dreamcast copy on videogamesnewyork.com.
Yes, and I being a huge Flashback fan, I knew about this. It's also coming out on Switch, too, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and what they've done is they've kind of taken, because the Flashback game has been released on so many different consoles, each version kind of had its own strengths and its own weaknesses, just kind of like how I explained with the Super Nintendo and the Genesis versions.
Right.
So they've kind of built this best of version of Flashback. They took like the most acclaimed soundtrack, the best full motion video from the PC version.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, they kind of just made a whole bunch of different pieces of the best flashbacks and chunked them all together, and that's the Flashback that you get. So I'm actually waiting for the Switch version to come out so I can jump on it, because I really need to have a version of Flashback on a console that I could take with me. That would be so cool, because it never came out in any portable systems, unless you count like the Sega Nomad or something like that. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that finally coming out in the States.
So is it worth a pickup? Since unless it's on a Switch, I usually won't play it. But
yes.
I have one of them.
Oh yeah, it's for sure. I mean, it's got some great gameplay, fantastic animation, a really cool sci-fi storyline, lots of really cool cinematics that, might not be so impressive nowadays, but if you look at it from a 1993, 1994 perspective, it uses that same kind of polygon cutscene effect that like Heart of the Alien and Out of This World, the same team that made Flashback made those two games. So it has like really impressive kind of full screen cinematic effects. Or there's like CG rendered FMV from like the PC and the CD version. So with the Switch version, you'll be able to switch back and forth between the 16-bit cutscenes or the full motion video cutscenes, kind of on the fly. So
that's a neat little idea.
Yeah, a lot of fan service in this game for people that really enjoyed it, and I'm sure anybody that's picking it up for the first time will dig it too.
Sure. That's the way to do it with a retro release, I think, is get in the things that people who played it originally like. Let them experience it how they remember and kind of broaden on that as you see fit.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, obviously the retro scene is huge right now, so people are really trying to bring all these old titles back and giving them the treatment that they weren't able to get back in the day. And
Sure.
Flashback's one of those titles that was fortunate enough to have so many releases that they can kind of build that best of version I was just talking about. So very cool stuff.
I had one more quick thing actually
Sure.
about US Gold before we move on. So I don't know how familiar you are with the company, but US Gold is a bit of a misnomer because it is not an American company, but it is a British company that was established to, quote-unquote, bring the best of the U.S. to European computer scene.
Interesting.
I think it has a little bit of a reputation as being kind of a crappy company, but that's not how it started.
Kind of like the UK version of LJN, basically?
Yeah, exactly. It's just like they had the best of intentions, and turns out the best of the U.S. maybe didn't quite make it over to Europe through US Gold. But one little tidbit that I found about the company that I found really fascinating was it almost didn't exist at all, because the founder is a guy named Jeff Brown, and he was in a band called Muscles, which was a British a blue-eyed soul group, which, if you don't know, is basically a white person soul group, like made out of a bunch of, blue-eyed, curly-haired blonde folk. And this was I believe it was in the 70s, and they were right on the cusp of stardom. Like, they had been getting radio play, they had a single that was out, and they were just kind of teetering on the brink of success, and they were scheduled to appear on a TV show called Top of the Pops, which to American, including myself, probably doesn't mean that much, but it was a big deal, and it is kind of accepted that if you were to appear on Top of the Pops, that's it. You're going to the next.
Like the Ed Sullivan Show in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that, yeah.
Like, you appear on this show and you're set. I think I had read that some inordinately large percentage of songs to appear on the show charted based on that appearance.
Wow.
But right on the day, week, sometime right when they were about to record, Elvis died. And that brought in just this huge sea change of the music that was being demanded,
Oh,
and
man.
their gig was canceled because they were kind of doing a bunch of memorial stuff, and so they never had their appearance. And coming that close to fame and not kind of getting it, the band broke up within a matter of months thereafter.
Wow.
Jeff Brown went out to found US Gold and bring the joys of Flashback to the world.
That's really crazy. Well, I'm glad that he got Flashback to the world, but it's funny how these like kind of near misses in history can totally change the course of events, huh? Very strange.
Exactly.
Very cool. All right, so are you ready to get on to the next track?
I'm ready.
All right, so what do you have for me next? What challenge shall I try to accomplish?
Next up is from a modern ZX Spectrum title called Egghead 5, Egghead Round the Med. It's composed by Yearsmie, and the track that I've picked is the title theme. Alright, so that was the track title theme from the game Egghead 5, Egghead Round the Med, composed by Yearsmie.
You got it right.
I don't mean to brag, but I think I nailed it.
No, this is a really good track. Years Mie has been. I'm very familiar with him because he has made himself known as to be a big fan of my Demo Scene podcast, the Impulse Project. He's a member of our Facebook group there. He's shared a lot of his music with us in that group, and he comments a lot on the podcast. Really good guy, and he really loves working with the ZX Spectrum and the AY38910 chip that's in it. So Ben, why did you pick this particular track?
Well, I was on a bit of a Spectrum tear, and I was just trying to find new music that I hadn't heard before, and I kind of stumbled on this cache of modern Spectrum games that had been coming out. And you just kind of, when you're experiencing new music, you're kind of like, oh, this is good, oh, this is nice. And then I heard this track and I was like, oh no, I need this.
Yep.
This gotta stay.
Yeah, he likes surrounding himself with people that also enjoy this particular sound chip, and it's only 3 square waves, and it can just do some amazing stuff. It's not like as powerful as like the SID chip that you would find in the Commodore 64, but it's still got some great sound going for it. And so he created this band called the AY Riders, and it's him and 2 other guys, and they use a combination of multiple AY chips and some live drums and some MIDI synthesizers, all kind of sequenced with this AY chip. So it makes some really, really cool sound. It sounds like a super beefed up, ZX Spectrum music. And he does all sorts of genres. This one's got more kind of like a Euro techno, very, very danceable vibe to it, but he'll do like songs that sound like metal and songs that sound like industrial stuff. So really talented guy, and he's really one of the biggest proponents of the chiptune scene in Europe, probably one of the most famous ones too.
I gotta check out some of the rest of his oeuvre, because this was a stone cold jam. I need more.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you'll enjoy some of his other stuff. It's all really, really high quality. If you guys out there do want to know more about this chip, if you enjoyed this song, head back to Impulse Project episode 10. It's a episode we called 39 Kilobyte Spaceship. It's the introductory track to the AY chip, and we go through the whole chip. We tell you basically who designed it, what systems you can find it in, what kind of channels it has. We play some of the best examples of AY music that you can find out there, and I think that we might actually have a track from Years Mie in that episode as well. So yeah, go check it out, because that was a really fun one. It's fun learning about these old chips that were new to me at the time. So
that was one of my personal favorite episodes, actually.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, I didn't know anything about the AY chip until we did that show, and it really convinced me that there's a lot of really good stuff out there that I had, totally overlooked. So
for sure,
finding stuff like this is always a lot of fun. Have you played this Egghead game, or do you know anything about it? Or?
Oh no, I know a very little about the game. I think it's kind of like maybe a Monty on the Run clone or something, I think I read, but I've never played a single Spectrum game. I'm only familiar with it through its music, so I'm pretty useless when it comes to the actual content of this game.
I think the first 3 Egghead games, if I'm not mistaken, I'm kind of talking off the top of my head here, but they were released as, ZX Spectrum contemporaries, so they came out while the ZX Spectrum was still active and coming out with new games. And I think 4 and 5 were released kind of posthumously, so they were, the system was already retro at that point, and they were designed for the system after the fact. And so they have, kind of like they're the pinnacle of ZX Spectrum technology, as high tech as you can get with like 8 colors on the screen at the same time. But yeah, I mean, they were kind of genre bending platforming games. They had a lot of different kinds of styles of gameplay built into them. I don't know much about them. I do know that the term egghead was popularized around the 1950s, and it was an epithet used to describe intellectuals in a derogatory manner. So I guess you could call us eggheads of the VGM scene. One of the most famous uses was when then Vice President Richard Nixon, running for president, called his opponent Adlai Stevenson an egghead, probably because he had this oval-shaped bald cranium, but also probably because Stevenson was a fair bit smarter than Nixon, as we'd soon come to find out. Richard Hofstadter wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning essay on anti-intellectualism in the U.S. during the 50s, and he stated, "During the campaign of 1952, the country seemed to be in need of some term to express that disdain for intellectuals, which by then had become a self-conscious motif in U.S. politics. The word egghead was originally used without invidious associations, but quickly assumed them and acquired a much sharper tone than the traditional highbrow. At first, the term was used mainly by Republicans against Stevenson's more liberal supporters, but the word soon became a more general term to describe anyone with advanced intellect and more limited social capabilities." I don't want to get too political, but I kind of feel like we're heading back to that point in the U.S.
When you were saying that, I was like,
Yeah.
That's sounding kind of
why I brought it up, so it just shows that history can kind of repeat itself, unfortunately. This particular egghead in the ZX Spectrum game doesn't strike me as one of those intellectuals that more conservative people might look down upon. I think he's just this kind of happy-go-lucky literal egg with a face on it that does platforming things and tries not to crack into my bowl for a delicious breakfast or something like that.
He's a nonpartisan Humpty Dumpty.
Exactly. And hopefully he doesn't have many great falls. Yes. Did you know that Humpty Dumpty was... I just learned this a couple days ago. Humpty Dumpty was written about a giant cannon that stood atop a rampart in Britain during the war, and it fell off of the rampart due to like a shockwave from a blast or something, and they tried to repair it but weren't able to. So this Humpty Dumpty song was written about a cannon. It was not like a fairy tale about an actual egg like it's turned into in modern days.
Interesting. I wonder how that transition happened from cannon to egg.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was just a rhyme written the military used to say to themselves, and then kids picked it up, or like "Ring Around the Rosie" has really negative connotations too. So it probably had a path through history kind of similar to that, where it kind of loses its meaning as it gets passed from generation to generation.
Sure. Nothing like the Black Plague and cannons as fodder for children's tales.
Exactly. Oh man, if only they knew. It's a good thing they didn't. For God's sakes. All right, so that pretty much sums up all the research I've done for Egghead. Do you want to move on to the next song?
I'm ready.
All right, so next one we got coming up is an Amiga CD32 game. It's from a game called Death Mask, and this came out in 1994. This is Flight to Venus, composed by Matthew Owens, otherwise known as Spectral Symphony. Let's hit it. And we're back. That was Flight to Venus, composed by Matthew Owens, otherwise known as Spectral Symphony, off the Amiga CD32 game Death Mask, released in 1994. I have never heard of this game before doing research and picking for this show, and I can kind of tell why this game is like a really cheesy like Wolfenstein 3D clone. The cool thing about it is it has side-by-side gameplay, which I guess if you had, a brother or a best friend or something back in the day and you wanted to play a game like this, that would have been fun to do before online came about. But the soundtrack is phenomenal. I mean, this one has that really quintessential mid-'80s drum kit where everything has just reverb on it that lasts until the next hit comes in, and then they just kind of overlap each other. I really like the feel of this one. But what did you think about it, Ben?
I thought that it didn't seem like it really fit with the game at all, but
right.
That did not stop it from rocking. It was it sounded like an 80s horror movie to me. Like I could see someone with a knife going down some dark hall, or maybe someone running. I don't know.
Had a little bit of a John Carpenter feel with like the higher plinky kind of pianos and stuff. And then that pacing, I think, is very indicative of like horror movies too, where it's just a slowly moving killer walking down a hallway while a gaggle of teenage kids are kind of like scrambling away from him or something like that. So,
right. Yeah, exactly.
Combined with seeing blocky characters shooting each other on the screen, I guess it kind of brings that whole horror feeling home. Yeah, nice long track, very strong finish. This is at a stage where CD music was just kind of beginning. 1994 was kind of like near the dawn of CD-based media as far as video games are concerned, and this is pretty high quality for that era. I remember, a lot of the Sega CD stuff was either live instruments, or if it was not directly from Sega itself, a lot of the music was still kind of cheesy sounding. But this felt like it was really, really well produced.
Yeah, I agree. I think you are more of an audiophile than I am, in the sense that you are very able to pick up on like more production, and I am more of a, oh yeah, that sounds good to me, I like the way that sounds, which I wish I was more like you sometimes, but I when you're saying that, totally agree. It makes complete sense to me. I'm right there with you.
It's actually kind of a curse. I have this really high sensitivity to white noise and static, to the point where, like, if I'm in a room and an air conditioner is on, I cannot think, I cannot function, I can't do anything. And so I think a lot of that has to, or a lot of that kind of culminates in a lot of my music quality. I guess I'll call it OCD, because I can't stand when music isn't full CD quality, like 100% crystal clear. If there's any sort of a static or a hiss behind anything, I start to freak out and I can't listen to it anymore. So, but this track in particular really feels very good to me. It doesn't have any of that kind of hissy quality to it. So
I believe the term you're looking for is VGM CD.
Yes, VGM CD.
You can go ahead and you can use that one going forward.
We'll just coin that. It's part of the VG Embassy.
Yes.
VGM
Slap
CD.
a trademark on that. So it's interesting that you called this a Wolfenstein clone, because I went back and read some of the era reviews of Death Mask, because it clearly is a Wolfenstein clone, but it was more commonly called a Doom clone. And I thought that was interesting, because back in the mid-90s, Doom clone was essentially a genre, because the term first-person shooter wasn't exactly coined yet. It was still kind of in this wishy-washy period where, everything was just compared to this game, although Doom wasn't obviously the first-person shooter, because it came right on the heels of Wolfenstein. And in fact, the first-person game that came out was way back in the 70s, I believe.
Wow, really?
Let me see here. It was in 1973, a game called Maze War that was for the IMLAC PDS-1 computers, which are installed in the NASA Ames Research Center.
Wow. Didn't even know that existed.
Yeah, I didn't either. And there's actually something like a dozen or so FPS games that came out in the intervening years, but they're not really what you would consider it FPS in the modern sense. It was a lot of tank shooters and kind of vector-based games, but
like Battlezone and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Eventually, you came all the way up to Wolfenstein, which was spun off into essentially Doom. Before I get too far down this rabbit hole, I want to say that if you have not seen the box art for Death Mask, you should look it up because it is crazy. It looks nothing like the game. And it looks kind of like an album cover for a Tribe Called Quest album in like the 90s. Just
wow,
like
really?
Bright colors, jagged lettering, wild 90s stamp all over it.
Sounds like they wanted to have it fly off the shelves based on the box more than the gameplay itself.
Give it the phalanx treatment.
Right.
Actually, have you heard of the interview with you posted it on your Facebook page, didn't you? The phalanx interview?
Pretty sure it was either me or somebody else put it on the old Pixel Tunes Radio
that was
page.
That was interesting. Did you? I assume you read the article.
Yeah, I did. And the banjo playing guy was like the guy's like crazy neighbor or like grandfather or something. It was like somebody related to the photographer.
Right.
It was a conscious decision to make the shoot 'em up game actually be an old guy with a banjo for some reason.
Yeah, it wasn't
because just like they slapped it together at the last minute.
It was because they knew the game wasn't going to sell well, so they were like, well, we've got to do something. This is our best bet, is to put on the worst possible cover image we can think of and see how it goes. It was a gamble, and I don't think it paid off very well. I don't think that was a very well-selling game.
It was one of my favorite shooters at the time, so they at least convinced one person to buy it.
Exactly. Sometimes when I'm doing research for things, it doesn't go as smoothly as I would like, and I want to tell you a tale of the Dyad versus Apache Software. So the game was developed by Apache Software, Death Mask that is, and that's all well and good. It's a company that was based out of the UK, and they have 5 titles under their belt. Mostly kind of unheard of stuff, but they did a Sensible Soccer, International Sensible Soccer, Death Mask, a game called Super Methane Brothers, which more on that to come, and they did a licensed game of Marsupilami, which is, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but it is a Franco-Belgian comic that came from the magazine Spirou back in the 50s. It's the kind of game that if it came out on Game Boy, Alberto Jose Gonzalez 100% did the soundtrack to it.
Absolutely.
So actually, maybe I should look it up, because if he did, I'm sure it's great. I know that he did the soundtrack for Spirou itself, but getting a little bit even far from my tangent here. So Apache Software, I wanted to know what happened to them, what became of them, what else they did, see what other kind of information I could get, but the SEO for them is just terrible because there is now the Apache Software Foundation, which is an American nonprofit corporation which supports Apache software projects, including the Apache HTTP server, and it was formed and incorporated in 1999. I looked through as many old magazine reviews as I could of this game, which is why I happen to know about that side-by-side multiplayer, and apparently it wasn't very well liked, or at least there were quite a few people who were taking digs at it, kind of calling it pointless since you were sitting next to the person. But I ended up going and looking through sort of the equivalent of the British Secretary of State, where you would look up a business registration to see if I could find whoever the registered owner of the Apache software was. I found an address and a phone number, but I looked it up on Google Maps and it just looks like someone's house. So I think it was probably a garage developer. I found another company that at one point was known as Apache Software, but they stopped going by that name in the 80s, and they went on to sell software to multi-level marketing or pyramid scheme companies.
Wow.
So I was just running into dead ends left and right, which, just sometimes it happens. And so unfortunately, we're never going to know any more about Apache Software. But I can tell you a little bit more of their other projects, most notably a knockoff of Bubble Bobble called Super Methane Brothers. It's also got a soundtrack by Matthew Owens, and this one came out on the Amiga, and apparently it was pretty well liked. They somehow got permission from Apache Software Limited to do a modern port with the original assets that came out on Windows, Linux, and a couple of other platforms that I wasn't super familiar with, like the RISC operating system. And between 2005 and 2017, it was downloaded nearly 50,000 times. So I even went so far as to find the company that released the game on mobile and try and find their contact information to ask if I could find out who they licensed the game from. But all I found was a Facebook page that had shared a bunch of articles in Russian, and I thought that maybe, despite the company being from Michigan, there was something else going on there, and I just had to back off and call this one a moderate success.
Yeah, man, that's a lot of really in-depth research for some very little information, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
considering the quality of Death Mask, maybe the company wasn't really worth knowing that much about in the first place. It sounds like they were just kind of shoveling out software to try to make a buck and not really too into making games for the love of making games. You know what I mean?
That's fair. I would say the consensus from the reviews that I read at the time was, can Doom be done on Amiga? Not really.
Yeah. It could later on, once the Amiga hardware got a lot better. There's the, I think it's called the Alien Breed series, the Alien Breed 3D, which was a very good first-person shooter, kind of like with PlayStation-level quality graphics on the Amiga. But I think that was much later on than 1994. I think it took at least another 3 or 4 years for Amiga hardware to kind of be able to support games of that quality. So
one last thing before we move on, I was thinking about the term Doom clone and how it stuck around as kind of this genre categorization for a while. And the only other time that I can think that has happened and kind of stuck on is in roguelikes, which are named after the game Rogue. I think probably most people are familiar with what a roguelike is, but other than that, I think that every other game has just kind of got its own genre tag. I mean, Japanese games have a million genre tags.
Yeah, well, there are Metroidvanias, which is
true.
kind of a combination of two game
That's
genre
a good point.
tags.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the only other instance that I know of that a game genre has been named after games that inspired it. All right, so I'm curious to hear what your next track is, sir.
All right, so next up, I will be picking a track from the game Night Slave, which was released on the PC-98 series of Japanese computers. This track was composed by Panda, which I am fairly sure is the alias of Yuki Nakayama, and this track is called Initial Velocity, Stage 1A.
Love this game, love this soundtrack. Let's hit it.
All right, so that was the track Initial Velocity, Stage 1A, from the game Night Slave, composed by Panda, or possibly Yuki Nakayama.
Fantastic track.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was surprised to hear that you had actually played this game.
Yeah, this is actually one of the first PC-98 games I had ever played. I love emulation, and it's not that, I want to like paint myself as a pirate, but I was always fascinated with how a computer could play a game designed for a completely different and unrelated system. So whenever I discover emulators for new systems, I love downloading them and checking them out. And it's not even so much to play the game itself, because like for Super Nintendo emulators or whatever, I enjoy them because of the technical aspect of it, but I still have a Super Nintendo that I play my games on. But for PC 98,
Right.
Sharp X68000, these were systems that never came out in the US, and there's really no way to play them here unless you A, know a lot of Japanese, and B, have a ton of money to be able to purchase them and import them into the US. So I got into PC 98 emulation and found some websites online that tell you how to kind of like configure the emulators and format your own virtual hard drives for them. And in doing some research of my own, found that Night Slave was probably one of the most playable games for English-speaking people or people who don't speak Japanese. So it was one of the first games that I tried out, and I was extremely impressed with the graphics, the music, etc. So how did you come about this particular track yourself?
This one was another one of my just found it by the music situations where I think it was on a YouTube playlist probably.
Mm-hmm.
I was just skipping around. I have a master YouTube playlist that I listen to at work of something like 300,000 VGM tracks from various YouTube playlists, all kind of mixed, shuffled together. And so when something interesting comes up, I'll like go a little bit deeper. And I heard this one of the tracks on the soundtrack, and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty good. Started listening through the rest of them, and when I caught this one, I was like, oh yeah, this gets me right in that sexy smooth that I need.
For sure. A lot of fantastic solos, just a great bass groove, really nice drum work in there. And just some cool like time changes and super fun breakdowns. It's extremely fresh, and it's only like I think 1 minute and 30 seconds, but it feels so much longer because there's like I think your brain is just parsing so much of what's going on in the song that it kind of stretches out the time for you. It feels like a much longer song than it really is.
Definitely.
So just a little information about Panda. Yeah, Panda's real name is Yuki Nakayama, and when he composes, and he has composer credits, he goes by the name Panda. But he's also both a game designer and a game director, and I think he does some programming as well. So whenever he's in credits for doing production or design work, he credits himself by his real name, Yuki Nakayama. So that's kind of why you might get credits from one name or the other name, but never both at the same time.
Cool. Yeah, I saw a couple of places and I did not make the connection, and I guess I didn't do the research. That's why we have you.
That's why I'm here. Well, it's a good thing because I've done a PC 98 show on Pixel Tunes Radio, so I learned a lot about the system and a lot about the people that composed for the system as well. So Panda's one of the more prolific and well celebrated composers out there for the PC 98. So my research for this went a little sideways. I wanted to, I was first focusing on the title of the game, and I felt that Night Slave just might open up too many cans of worms I didn't really want to open for a video game music podcast. So the term initial velocity, though, refers to the speed at which an object starts to move, regardless of direction or force. And the fastest initial velocity known on the planet Earth, man-made anyway, is created by the Enhanced Hypervelocity Launcher, or EHL. And I think Enhanced Hypervelocity Launcher sounds like a video game weapon to begin with. It's really cool that it's a real thing. It's a super high-powered gun that can launch thin flyer plates up to 16 kilometers per second. And for the imperialists in the audience, that's just shy of 10 miles per second. That's insane. So the benefits of having a device like this are multiple. In one instance, scientists have used it to simulate what damage a small spacebound particle might do to an orbiting space station if they collided at a combined speed of 36,000 miles per hour. A second use, due to the immense pressure and heat that the launched particles are subjected to, could teach scientists about how certain minerals and metals might behave on high-pressure planets like Jupiter. So if we ever sent a space probe out to Jupiter or a planet that has an extremely high-pressure atmosphere, we can determine what metals and what thicknesses we need to use to be able to help a planet-side probe survive under those pressured conditions. Eventually, scientists hope that this technology could be used to fire materials into space rather than fitting them into a rocket, as that would be a much more energy efficient and cost-effective method. So could you imagine just like shooting things into space out of a giant gun? Like that's the best science fiction I can possibly imagine come to life.
It's like Evel Knievel in a cannon just shooting someone into space.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Night Slave takes place. So if you've ever played a game like Cybernator or Metal Warrior, are you familiar with those on the SNES?
Yeah.
Night Slave is actually very similar to those games. It even controls very similarly. So you're piloting a mech. It's a side-scrolling kind of a game, and it's strafing. So you use several buttons to control your arm, which is your gun, movement up and down, and then you can fly up and down. You've got some boost shoes, and you can fly for short periods of time. You can move back and forth while facing in one direction, or you can swivel yourself into another direction. So all of the gameplay elements that Cybernator had were kind of prevalent in Night Slave as well. I'm pretty sure Cybernator came afterwards. Feels a little more advanced than Night Slave did. I think Night Slave was kind of like the prototype for a game like Cybernator was. And I think that initial velocity might even have something to do with what you see in the game itself, because when you start off kind of similar to Cybernator, the mechs kind of shoot out of the ships that they're in with this, kind of platform that kind of rams it forward as fast as possible. And so that kind of reminded me of this advanced hypervelocity launcher that I was just talking about. So not going 36,000 miles an hour, though. I can't even imagine going that fast. Like, that's insane. And I can't imagine that humans can actually create a device that makes things go that fast. That just blows my mind.
Yeah, I can throw things just a little bit less fast than that.
Yeah, that might hurt your hand a little bit.
So which has a better soundtrack, Cybernator or Night Slave?
I prefer Night Slave. I mean, I'm an FM head to begin with. So, and Cybernator has a great soundtrack, but I don't know. I am a sucker for the PC-98. I really love high-quality FM music, and so this game hits all the right spots as far as the soundtrack goes. The other cool thing about, cool depending on your point of view, but this game has some adult elements as well. So you play the side-scrolling Cybernator-type game, but then in between each level, it tells the visual novel style story of the all-female, of course, team that controls these mechs, and it, somehow or another clothes end up getting removed. And I think they just kind of figure out whatever weird situation they can to make this a little bit more for the adults. But there's also, it's one of the few games on the PC-98 where you have the option to turn off the adult content. So if a kid wants to play the game, they can just enjoy the action sequences and kind of remove all of the suggestive sexual content. So that's pretty cool.
I'm surprised to hear that. I was pretty sure that by law, every PC-98 game has to have somebody naked in it.
It almost seems like a prerequisite, huh?
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all I got for that. Let's move on to the next track.
All right, what do you got?
I spoke a little bit about the C64 and the SID chip before when we were talking about the AY. So here is an actual C64 song. This is the title theme from the game Jet Powered Jack, which was composed by Gary Pardis and came out in 1995. Let's rock it. All right, guys, that was the title theme composed by Gary Partis from Jet Power Jack, which came out on the Commodore 64 in 1985. I was like 8 years old, I think, at the time, around there. Something like that. Yeah, I'm old. I love this song. I don't know, it feels... I'm so used to listening to Commodore 64 demo scene music because of all the C64 tracks that I play on the Impulse project. And all of that is, it's fantastic stuff, but it's all very... how much can I impress you kind of music with lots of crazy percussion and like dubstep elements and time changes and stuff. And it's kind of refreshing every once in a while to hear a Sid Music song that's kind of very straightforward. Not a lot of percussion, but just some really nicely composed series of chords and like a very nice, fresh, simple feel.
Right.
And kind of a big difference from a lot of the very flashy CD-based stuff that I've been playing so far on this podcast too. So I don't know, what'd you think about this one, Ben?
I really liked it. It's simple, but it has a little bit of an elegance to it. I think it's really like composed with a purpose. Like this was for a game, and it has a few little twists and turns that it takes you on. But it's like a nice little simple but pleasant little ditty. It reminds me kind of like maybe something from the Asterix games on the C64. Just something kind of like compact, but it has like a richness to it because of the instrumentation. I don't know, it gives it a little bit of depth or girth or something. There's something about it that gives it a little bit of weight. So I really like that on the C64, and I totally get what you're saying about, the demo scene guys trying to flex their muscles and kind of milk everything that they can from the chip, and this was much more crisp.
Yeah, and a little more subdued too.
Sure.
And it's very textured as well. I mean, the SID just has this... you can't really get around it. Not many people just use a flat, sine wave when they're composing C64 stuff. And so, because all the channels were fully programmable, it was very easy to get very rich sounding texture out of this. And so even with these kind of simple chords and simple melodies, you're able to get a very, very rich sound. As far as the game goes, it's a pretty simple game. It's a single screen action game. You play as a character named Jack who has, surprise, a jetpack. and he flies around and he's got to destroy some enemies. I think that the object of the game is to kind of clear the enemies from the screen. I just played it very briefly a couple weeks ago, and it wasn't anything that I was like, oh my goodness, I can't wait to talk about the gameplay on the podcast. It didn't really make too much of an impression on me, but the title screen music was good stuff, so I wanted to share it with everyone.
So I have not played the game either, but I did notice that it's available for free online. I don't know if that's with permission or just ahoy matey, but bbcmicro.co.uk just had it posted. Mm-hmm. A little bit more about the game. It was developed by a single coder named Simon Phipps, and his personal website had a little bit more information. He first published the game, and according to him, he was inspired by the game Jetpack with just a C, J-E-T-P-A-C, on the Sinclair Spectrum. And a friend of his had it, and I guess he was just hanging out at his house and made an impact on him. And so he decided to go back and kind of rip it off, or, let's just say make his own. Jetpack, the game itself, was not extremely important or remarkable, but it's significant because it's the first game to be released by the company who later went on to become Rare.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
It's a little piece of history.
Exactly. The Commodore 64 version of the game was programmed by Gary Partis, as you mentioned. So, actually, the creator of the game had very little to do with this version that we're listening to. And it was the foray of Micropower into Commodore publishing.
Cool. So Gary Partis not only composed the soundtrack, but he also programmed this version of the game as well?
Mm-hmm, yeah, I guess he handled the port.
Nice. So it's kind of like a little parallel to Panda, Yuki Nakayama, man of many hats.
Yeah. So as far as jetpacks themselves, the first jetpack was developed in 1919 by a Russian inventor named Alexander Andreev. It was apparently a pretty well-regarded project. And technology historians think that there might have been a patent that was issued, but apparently it wasn't quite built or tested, and it was an oxygen and methane powered, so basically a rocket with wings. The wings were 3 feet long on each side, kind of almost like, turning yourself into a plane. There is a fairly specific and somewhat fascinating book called Jetpack Dreams, One Man's Up and Down, but Mostly Down, Search for the Greatest Invention That Never Was. And this author essentially describes how he was in a bar with a friend of his who just in a drunken stupor kind of like slammed his drink on the table and said, "Where's my jetpack? I was promised a jetpack since I've been a kid. They don't exist. Why not?" And so the author decided to go and find the answer. I only read a little bit of it because the only parts that I could find for free were the first couple of chapters, but it's pretty interesting. There is a burgeoning modern jetpack industry, and in fact for a while Google X was working on jetpacks. Google X, for those who don't know, is Google's super secret laboratory arm, which is, I guess they just churn out hundreds and hundreds of ideas, and just kind of their goal is to shoot down ideas early, but just get as many ideas as they can, shoot them down if they don't work, and then the ones that have legs, string those out and become the next big thing. This is a quote from them. They wanted to make a jetpack that, quote, wasn't a death trap, unquote. So they looked into it and kind of did the research, and the head of Google X is a guy named Astro Teller, and he said that it just doesn't have the practicality that Google projects need. It was too loud, which is not something that I would have thought about, and it's incredibly fuel inefficient.
Makes sense. And nobody wants a jetpack that's going to run out of fuel.
Exactly, yeah. That's one of those things that you want to, it's a real measure twice, cut once situation.
Right. I do like those kind of like water jetpacks. That can, suck up the kind of like have an infinite amount of power as long as you're within range of water. And they seem to control really well too.
Right, except for, limited range.
Yeah.
Cannot take those to work.
Which I think is safer, because that way at least you're always over water. So if you do lose control, you're splashing down instead of crashing down.
Yeah. Although, as my physics professor used to say, it's not the fall that kills you, it's the sudden stop at the end.
Exactly.
So, water looks nice and cushy until you're doing a belly flop.
You got to displace a lot at once.
Yeah. With regards to fuel, apparently there are, also in this kind of modern jetpack vein, there are home hobbyists who try to make their own jetpacks, and the fuel is an issue because hydrogen peroxide is a big ingredient in jetpack fuel, and it's no longer produced by most chemical companies. And the ones that do super high concentration hydrogen peroxide, and they only sell it to large corporations or even governments. So, like, the amateurs have to kind of set up their own hydrogen peroxide distillation installations. So,
this sounds like a bad idea.
Yeah, if you thought the type of person who would build their own jetpack is a dangerous lunatic, well, guess what? They've also probably got a hydrogen peroxide distillation installation in their garage.
God. I hope the fire department is on call 24/7 for these guys.
Yeah.
Sounds like they're going to need it.
Exactly. And just real quick, I wanted to also say that jetpacks in fiction have been around for almost as long. They were widely credited as being first popularized in a 1928 issue of a magazine called Amazing Stories, which is kind of a very important early sci-fi periodical.
Yeah, I've heard of it myself.
The story that is most important in this issue is a story called Armageddon 2419 AD, which was the story that went on to create the character Buck Rogers, who is a super important early science fiction character. But the jetpack itself was actually featured from a different story on the cover called The Skylark of Space, which was a serially published story between 1915 and 1921.
Wow, that early.
Exactly. And the cover art it's not too different from how you would sort of picture a jetpack. The dude is wearing a jumpsuit, and he has what looks like kind of like a leather football helmet and gloves and these thigh-high boots. But other than that, the actual apparatus he's wearing is kind of how you would picture a jetpack to be. I guess the combination of these two stories made this particular issue of Amazing Stories one of the most notable in history.
Very cool. I was hoping you would do something on jetpacks because I was kind of really interested in hearing about them, and you did not let me down at all.
Well, there's a whole book about them if you're interested in more. It's a pretty well-written book. He gets way, way into detail.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Maybe we'll put some links to it in the show notes.
Sure.
As well, for fellow jetpack enthusiasts. We can fly around the embassy together.
Exactly.
All right, so I am ready to hear your next track for me. What you got on the list?
All right, so this is my final pick of the episode. It comes from an arcade game called Oh My God! This is game BGM 3, and it was composed by Hiroyuki Yanada. Alright, so that was game BGM 3 from the arcade game Oh My God, composed by Hiroyuki Yanada.
Fun track.
So what'd you think?
I really enjoyed this one. I love the organs that just start out all by themselves with this really cool groove to them, and then everything else just kind of surrounds it, and it sounds like all the instruments are just kind of having this party together. And it's a pretty short loop, but it's so infectious you just keep kind of listening to it over and over again and don't even realize it when you're kind of like hearing the same patterns, because you keep picking up new stuff when you hear it for the third or fourth time.
Sure. So I knew I wanted to play something from this game, and there were a couple of tracks I was between, but that's just so happy, and like that organ is just like this peppy. You did a great job of describing it, and just earworm stuck with me.
Yeah, for sure. And for, the rest of the soundtrack in this game is like, it's kind of hit or miss. A lot of them are kind of like slower tracks, or they feel like a little more gospel-y, but then this track kind of comes out of nowhere and isn't much like anything else on the soundtrack, but it's really good stuff.
Agreed.
And unfortunately, the one drawback I have, and this goes back to kind of like my problems with sound quality, is as an arcade game that came out in 1993, most of the games that came out then had FM soundtracks and had really clear audio. They usually had like an OKI or an Oki sampler that would just take care of like little sample hits, like orchestra hits or little vocal sound effects or sampled sound effects that were in the game. This arcade game only used an OKI sampler for all of the audio in the game. So this song is basically one huge low-quality compressed sample that kind of plays on loop over and over again. So it was probably composed using, standard synthesizers and audio equipment in a studio somewhere, and then recorded and compressed to be played on a loop in the arcade. And I wish that they had maybe done this on an FM chip. I think this would have sounded really good in a super high quality stereo style. Unfortunately, it's kind of mono and kind of compressed, but even though that is all said and done, it's still a really good track, and I still like it even though there is a little bit of staticky compression going on there. So you did good, sir.
Well, I was not super familiar with this composer's work, but if I give you a little peek behind the curtain and how my mind works, I was actually going to give you a Virtual Boy track because he is the composer of the Jack Brothers or Jack Bros soundtrack. And I was listening to the songs, and I like a bunch of them, but I just was kind of looking at his gameography, and I was like, a game called Oh My God for the arcade? All right, now I want to know what this is about. And then just by the sheer difficulty of finding the music in the first place, I was like, yeah, we got to do this instead.
Yeah, no, definitely a good choice. The game itself is really interesting. I think it kind of like takes place in heaven. It's a puzzle game, and so it plays kind of similar to Puyo Puyo, but the pieces that drop from the sky are all snakes. And they control kind of like the game Snake. So you move up, down, left, and right, and the tail kind of follows the head around. And however the snake is positioned when it hits the ground, that's where the blocks land. It's kind of difficult to get used to because you can't just move left and right. If the head is kind of bumping against its own body, then it can't move in that direction. You have to move up and around and over to get it to go left or right. So the cool thing is they kind of give you a little benefit. The blocks on the bottom all have little faces on them, kind of like Puyo Puyo. And the faces will kind of like change their expression if a matching piece above it is going to fall on top of it. So you can kind of concentrate on the bottom and kind of move your snake around until you see which is going to match up with what. So it makes it a little easier to drop if you start focusing on those pieces as you fall. I remember playing Snake on my old Nokia phone, like ages and ages and ages ago.
Yes.
And those games, you control like a little snake-like creature on a single-screen playfield, and you're tasked with eating a single pixel placed randomly on the screen. Every time you eat the pixel, it gets added to the end of your snakes. The snake gets longer and longer and longer, and you lose the game if your snake crashes into the sides of the level, or if any part of its own body touches itself, you also die. The score can be generated based on the length of the snake, how many pixels you ate, or the amount of time you spend playing depending on the version. And you win the game when the snake takes up the entire screen with no space left to move, which is like nearly impossible. I've seen some people do it like on video, but very, very few can. It's like solving a Rubik's Cube kind of a deal. There's also a multiplayer variant in which players attempt to be the first one to eat the pixels and block each other's path, forcing them out of the game. So if you remember like the motorbike or the light cycle scenes in Tron, very similar to that. Yeah, they're trying to block each other out, and they make these trails behind them. The concept for the game Snake originated in 1976, believe it or not, in an arcade game called Blockade, which was published by Gremlin Software. Since then, there have been hundreds of variations on the game over hundreds of different operating systems and devices. It rose to worldwide popularity in 1998 when Swedish electronics manufacturer Nokia began preloading simple versions of the game on its cell phones. They've released no less than 10 distinct versions of the game over the years, and the game is still being released in the modern era with the online multiplayer Slither.io in 2016 and Facebook releasing a version for its Messenger app in 2017. I think this is probably one of the most famous and popular video games to ever come out. You know, you think of like, what's the most popular video game, and you'll probably say like Super Mario Brothers or something like that, because everyone knows who Mario is, but I don't know if as many people have played Mario as they've played Snake. I think everybody and their mom has probably played a version of Snake at some point in their life.
Right. Yeah, it's like saying what game has the most install base. It's Solitaire, because it's on every Windows computer.
Right, exactly. Whether you use it or not.
Right.
But yeah, Snake has always been fun for me. It's always been a good time waster. I used to work for Singular Wireless way back before they became AT&T Wireless, and so we sold some of those very first Nokia phones that actually had Snake installed on them. And I remember being bored at work and just pulling out a phone, when there was nobody else in the store, and just kind of, playing Snake here and there and trying to beat my high score. And everywhere I've gone and every kind of computer system or phone that I've had, there's always been some sort of version of Snake available for it.
Rattler Race, that was my favorite.
Oh, yeah. And I've still never beaten it as much as I've played it. I've gotten some pretty high scores, but it's like you really need to think like 12 to 13 steps ahead when you're playing Snake if you're playing to fill up the entire screen.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, so it's cool. I mean, this Oh My God game is, because of this OKI sample that they have, has a really large memory for holding long samples. The game is called that because every time you lose the game, there's this vocal sample of this crowd of kids going, "Oh my God!"
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun. The game has kind of like its tongue and it's firmly planted in its cheek the whole time you're playing it, and it's worth playing. It's a multiplayer game too, so you can play against another player on the same screen, and it's kind of fun once you get the hang of it. It's not your typical puzzle game. You're almost like playing Snake plus you're playing a puzzle game at the same time. It's definitely worth a try.
Cool.
Yeah, you should play it sometime.
I think I might
do it.
You can challenge me. We can play online.
That would be fun
over MAME.
That would be awesome.
Or we can just get out our Nokias and multiplayer Snake.
Perfect. Oh, I think they do have like online multiplayer Snake. I think that version of Facebook that I was talking about on Messenger, you can actually do a multiplayer version of Snake, and I think that's a game that needs to come back and become popular. Screw Fortnite and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and all those gamer bro titles. Everybody should just be playing Snake on their PCs. Go back to a simpler time.
We can just make it as a pack-in with Candy Crush.
Perfect.
And then we could be good. Get in with that audience.
I am totally with you on that one. All right, man. So that's all I got for Oh My God. Are you ready for the last track of the show?
I was born ready.
Okay, Mr. Ready. Let's take a listen to Mr. Rubber Dinosaur from the game Harmful Park. This came out of the PlayStation only in Japan in 1997, composed by Hitoshi Sata. Let's give it a whirl. All right, that was Mr. Rubber Dinosaur, composed by Hitoshi Sata from the game Harmful Park. Came out on the Japanese PlayStation in 1997. And Mr. Dyad, sir, you're recalling this one of your favorites of the show. It's pretty cool. I love how it begins with that kind of like polka-style accordion solo, and you're getting a feel for the song. You're like, this is interesting. I don't know if I'm too into this. And then it just, blasts into this great kind of dance tune. What'd you think about it?
When you sent me your list of tracks and I was kind of listening through them, when this started, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I like this. It would be very different if it didn't have that whole second half to it. And then when it made that flip, I was like, oh my gosh, like throwing papers around the room, Like,
I can't believe this.
what happened? I've been had. It's great. It is. I think it might be my favorite track from the show.
Yeah, this is a pretty interesting game. I'm sure you probably looked it up during your research a little bit, but so it's a horizontal shoot 'em up that really should have come out in the US. Like, there isn't that much text that it couldn't have been localized pretty easily. The visuals are very similar to something like Parodius or Sexy Parodius, where it's kind of a cute 'em up kind of a deal. You're flying through a amusement park themed planet, and obviously everything is out to get you, thus the name Harmful Park. So it's like a harmful theme park. And so, there's giant enemies that are going around on a Ferris wheel, and you've got to fly in between them, and, those pirate ships that swing back and forth and stuff. And they take all these amusement park rides and kind of turn them into creative enemies that you can fight as you're flying through this game. Great soundtrack. This is just one of the many cool tunes. This is a boss fight that you will play against a giant rubber, bouncy kind of dinosaur creature. And all the bosses are kind of unique and very fun to look at as well as to play. So definitely a game worth checking out.
The sprites look amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely want to. I'm not a super huge shooter fan, but I'm sold on this game.
Yeah, it's like kind of like watching a cartoon as well as playing a shooter. So
yeah, they should do something like that, only set with Mickey Mouse era cartoons. I bet that would sell well.
Maybe go out with guys with like cups on their head, something like that.
Oh, that's weird, but yeah, maybe.
Yeah, that might work.
Yeah. So the only other thing that I wanted to mention about the game is I saw that due to a mistranslation, the weapon choices are potato, ice cream, pie, and Jerry.
Oh, yeah.
And I have my old roommate from law school is named Jerry, and I just like the idea of launching him from a spaceship at enemies and, like using the initial velocity terrorizing weapon, just launching him right out. And normally I wouldn't pick on a mistranslation, but because I happen to know a Jerry very well, it stuck out to me. So, since this is set in an amusement park, there is lots of great fodder about amusement parks out there. And I started getting into abandoned amusement parks, and I realized that one of the most famous abandoned amusement parks is one that I used to visit as a kid, which is Boblo Island. Boblo Island is located in Amherstburg, Ontario, Canada, and it is actually, and now it's my turn to mispronounce French, Bois Blanc Island? Bob Blanc, probably? And it's just shortened to Boblo Island. And to get there, you actually had to take a ferry boat from Detroit. I grew up in Michigan, so we would go there when I was a kid every once in a while. And this is a really of-the-era claim to fame, but it once had the second largest dance hall in the world,
wow,
which could hold over 5,000 dancers.
Holy cow.
And on top of that, it had one of the world's largest orchestrions, which is an automated self-playing orchestra machine. The one in Boblo Island had 419 pipes and its own percussion section.
Holy cow.
So, yeah, picture like a giant pipe organ playing by itself. And now kind of picture it in an abandoned amusement park and let the terror kind of wash over you briefly. But then come back, because there's more.
And now picture it as a boss in a horizontal shooter.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Boblo Island is also the subject of a famous United States Supreme Court case involving discrimination. And I just wanted to pull a quote from it that I thought was pretty great. The company that ran the ferries had a policy against zoot suiters, the rowdy-ish, and the rough and the boisterous.
Interesting.
They kind of interpreted that to basically mean minorities, which is not so great, but the actual quote itself, I think, is like, those are the people I want to hang out with. I would love, give me some zoot suiters, rowdy-ish, rough and boisterous.
Yes, and bring them to a giant dance hall with an automated orchestra.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a great night to me. I would have a ball.
Uh-huh. They also had something called Scuda boats, which are bumper cars, only boats. So you just kind of have these little mini boats, and you'd be driving them around and bump into people. So now Boblo Island is a exclusive gated community. So they basically just knocked everything down and put up mansions. But at one point, it was all that and more.
So the park is completely decimated? It doesn't exist anymore?
It's almost completely knocked down, and there are a few just kind of husks of the park that remain. I think the dance hall is completely destroyed, and maybe the docks still exist in some parts, but from the pictures I saw, it's mostly just torn down and put up with expensive houses. So I have one more amusement park anecdote, and then I have a special surprise for you after that.
Very fun.
So something that you just said just kind of triggered in my mind about, like, when you see the abandoned theme parks, you sort of think, at least I do, why were they here in the first place? Like, who was out there clamoring for whatever it was that they're offering? And one of my favorite amusement parks is Holiday World, which was originally called Santa Claus Land because it's located in Santa Claus, Indiana, which I have been to. It is one of the oldest theme parks in America. Construction started on it in 1945, and it opened in August in 1946, and it does what it says on the tin. It is a Santa Claus-themed amusement park. Since then, they've installed, like, a water park and roller coasters and stuff, but apparently...
I think Santa does on his spare time.
Exactly. So... Santa Claus, Indiana, everything is named, Kris Kringle Lane and Dasher Trail and stuff. It's just this, like, real small town and kind of between Kentucky and Indiana. And apparently this kind of local businessman, I don't remember why he was in Santa Claus, but he went there with his 9 kids, and he was like, oh, there's nothing Santa Claus here. I'm going to build a theme park, and when people come to Santa Claus, they're going to see him. And it sprung up from there. Now there's the Santa Claus Inn, which is apparently a very not great hotel, so I managed to avoid it when I was there, but you got everything Santa Claus you could ever need right here in the good old US of A.
In Indiana, of all places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, to close out my research, I have a very special treat, mostly for me. I have a quiz for you.
Oh, boy. Okay. Should I have been paying attention this entire podcast? Is that kind of quiz?
No, I would have tuned out to most of what I'm saying. I'm quite boring. Yeah.
Okay, thank God.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think I've mentioned this on any of my podcasting stuff, but I used to write trivia for my coworkers, not as like an official capacity. I just did it for fun. I would send out weekly trivia. And so, for you, I have prepared 5 short multiple choice trivia questions. And,
okay.
The podcast listeners can play along. And these are quiz of defunct amusement parks.
Oh,
and
wow, okay.
I will ask you a question, and you need to tell me which is not a real defunct amusement park.
Okay.
And I'll give you 3 choices, and then you pick the one that is not, which is fake. Sound doable?
Sounds good to me. I don't have too much knowledge on this, but I'm going to try to use deductive reasoning here.
Okay, knowledge won't help you. This is trivia.
I figured.
Okay. So, question 1. Which is not a real defunct amusement park? A. Flamingo Gardens Gold Panning for Children. B. Children's Amusement Park, 7-Star Park. Or C. Simon Lessing's Children's Triathlon Training Park.
Wow. I don't know, man. C seems too obvious to me. I'm going to go with A, the Gold Panning Park.
I'm so happy you chose that, because no, that is a real defunct amusement park. This is what I was going back to what I was talking about. Someone was like, there's lots of things wrong in this world, and one of them is that there is no place for my children to go and pan for gold.
Right. We need more child labor.
Right, other than the Wild West. No, the correct answer, and in this case fake, park was Simon Lessing's Children's Triathlon.
Oh, I was so close, too.
Yes.
That was the obvious one.
Simon Lessing is a famous triathlete, arguably the most famous triathlete in history, but no, he does not have, to my knowledge, a theme park named after him.
All right, so I'm 0 for 5 so far.
Right. But, are you ready for the next question?
I am ready, sir. Hit me with it.
Okay, which is not a real defunct amusement park? A. The Dinosaur World in Beaver, Arkansas. B. Dinosaur Park in Isla Nublar, Costa Rica. Or C. Dinosaur Adventureland in Pensacola, Florida.
A.
Nope, there is indeed a Dinosaur World in Beaver, Arkansas. Where there is not is Dinosaur Park in Isla Nublar, because that is a fictional island and the setting of Jurassic Park.
Oh, you're right. I wasn't even paying attention. I should have paid better attention to that. Okay, so there might be some hints here and there. All right, so I'm getting used to how this quiz works now.
You got to adjust. I'm keeping it.
Yes.
I'm fast and loose, but hey, you've got a 1 in 3 chance no matter what.
Fair enough. I'm so packed full of research and extra knowledge now that my brain's just probably not working on all cylinders. That's the excuse I'm going to give here.
Yeah. That's how I live my life every day. Now you know what it's like to be me. Full of just totally useless. So, which of the following is not a real defunct amusement park? A. Relaxoplasmosis in Luna Park, Berlin. B. Leisureland Fair in Longwarren, Victoria. Or C. Planet Fun Fun in Kareva, Finland.
I don't know. The A and C both have pretty wacky names, but they're also not American, so European stuff can have wacky names.
That's true.
Planet Fun Fun sounds very Japanese, even though it's from Finland. Sounds like one of those, happy joy time kind of places. What was the name of A again? Can you repeat that?
Relaxoplasmosis.
Dude, that sounds like a vaporwave band.
In Berlin, it could be. Vaporwave out of Berlin.
That's very true. I'm going to go... I hate to keep saying A, but that always sounds like the one that's fake to me. All right, I'm going to go with A. I'm going to go against my better judgment. Relaxoplasmosis.
You are correct.
Oh, yes! I want that to be a real place.
Relaxoplasmosis is it just sounds like toxoplasmosis, which is something you don't want to get.
Not at all.
It is a parasitic disease, which is most commonly associated with exposure to infected cat poop.
Fair enough.
Relaxoplasmosis sounds like an arguably better experience.
It would be nice if cat poop made you chill out, like
That's
relaxoplasmosis.
It makes my cat chill out.
Yeah. Exactly. So maybe if they had catnip and then pooped it out and then you got infected, you would just be a chill dude for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Become a surfer.
I'm going to leave the research up to someone else on that particular aspect of. But you're on the board. 1 out of 3 so far.
1 out of 3. All right. So hit me with the next one. Let's see if we can double my score here.
All right. We got 2 more, which is not a real defunct amusement park. The Aquatarium, which is later known as Shark World. I should give you letters. A is the Aquatarium.
Mm-hmm.
B, Milton Bradley Company's Checkerland, which was later known as Asmic Island. Or C, Hard Rock Park, later known as Freestyle Music Park.
B was what was it,
Milton Bradley Company's Checkerland, later known as Asmic Island.
Yeah, that sounds fake to me. I'm going to go with B.
It is fake.
Sweet.
Although, if Milton Bradley had a theme park, I like to think it would be called Checkerland, and I also like to think it would be defunct.
Yeah, I see from a marketing perspective, I think that Checkerland probably wouldn't have gone past the focus groups.
Mm-hmm.
They probably want to go with a better Milton Bradley kind of a property there. Maybe like Mousetrap Land or something like that.
Uh-huh. And Asmic Island was just because I like to picture the pink dinosaur having his own theme park.
I pictured that as well.
All right, so final one, and
Nice.
To make this. Wait, you're 2 for 2. So really, I don't need to give you fancy 10,000 points or anything. This is for all the marbles, win or lose.
Okay.
Which is not a real defunct amusement park? A, Hanna-Barbera Land. B, Ponce de Leon Amusement Park. Or C, Momofuku Ando Gardens.
Ponce de Leon Amusement Park. God, this is just full of windmills. Oh wait, no. Ponce de Leon was the guy who was looking for the Fountain of Youth, right?
Sure, I'll buy that.
I'm pretty sure that.
When you pick a track from a Ponce de Leon video game, then I'll do the research on that part.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, I believe that he was from Spain and he traveled to Florida to find the Fountain of Youth.
It's not here.
It's not there. It never was.
No.
And I think he died of old age because of that. Momofuku, that sounds like a video game that I remember in the back of my head somewhere. Yeah, I'm going to go with C.
That is correct.
Oh, man, 3 for 5.
Momofuku Ando is an inventor and businessman born in Imperial Japanese Taiwan who is most notable for founding and inventing instant noodles, instant ramen, and cup noodles.
That's okay. I have done research on that recently for some reason or another. Maybe that's why the name sounded familiar in the back of my head. So very
you
cool.
You are a trivia master.
That
3
was
out of 5. That is a passing score in this game.
I did not expect to score that high. I am impressed with myself, and I am impressed with you for coming up with very convincing fake amusement park names, sir. So,
well, much like Stella, you got your groove back, and all's well that ends well.
So in tribute to the Legacy Music Hour, we at the VG Embassy salute you, Ben. And thank you for hanging out with me. I learned a lot. I hope everybody listening learned a lot. We learned a lot about music and games and just completely random information that you can now torment your friends with.
I think we can both agree that we both prepared arguably the best podcast of all time with musical selections.
No, I agree with you. Lots of variation here from all walks of life in video games. We kind of stuck to the 80s and 90s for the most part, but I feel like even so, staying within like one kind of like 10, 12 year span,
sure,
there's been a lot of different kinds of music and a lot of different sound, and as Emily would call it, different ear feels.
Yep.
As far as our music goes. So yeah, thank you so much, Ben. I really enjoyed doing this. I would love to do more dyad challenges.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So as far as the Dyad Presents, what's going on with your show? You're on a little hiatus now, or are you coming out with new shows anytime soon?
Yeah, so to those listeners of the show, I announced that, I think I announced on the show that my wife is pregnant, and so I was planning on scaling back my release schedule anyway, and I just kind of moved it up because I had some real life stuff come up that took my attention away from podcasting. I am not done. I'm actually, this last week and a half, I've been more active in the scene with recording this guest spot. I've got another guest episode on another podcast coming up, and recorded another secret project about a podcast. And
awesome.
I have just started writing the script to a kind of skit episode. To those of you who might have heard the WSXY skit episode I released on VGM Jukebox Guy's feed, I have another one kind of like that in the works, and I've started doing about a third of the way done with my next episode, which is a huge historical look at something.
Very cool.
So I'm working on it.
Very, very cool. Hopefully by the time this comes out in August, we might have some more details about whatever it is you're talking about. But I'm looking forward to it because everything you've put out has been so entertaining. I've loved listening to the Dyad Presents. WSXY had me in stitches the whole way through. Lots of cool character voices and really like cleverly written parts and some great music in there as well. So always a pleasure to chat with you, Ben, and always a pleasure to listen to your stuff. I love to have you back in the future. And welcome to the pantheon of VG ambassadors at the VG Embassy.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here. I'd love to be back, and thank you for the kind words. It was awesome.
Cool. All right. So, listeners and fans, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Thank you to Indira J for the amazing artwork that you see on our cover. Trevin Hughes, otherwise known as Dread, for the podcast theme song. And you can find the show on iTunes. Please leave us a rating if you enjoy us. Ratings will make the show more visible and help more people discover the VG Embassy. You can find our show on Facebook. You can head to facebook.com/groups/the VG Embassy. I just launched that as of this recording about a week ago or so with the final Pixel Tunes radio that just came out, and we're already heading up to 30-40 members strong, and we've got some great conversation and some great content already in that group. So I'm hoping by the time this episode comes out, the Facebook group is active and a lot of fun to hang out. You can find me on Twitter at the VG Embassy, or my personal Twitter at Ruiner9. And I'd love to hear your feedback. You know, as this show goes, it hasn't been released yet, so I haven't gotten any feedback from the past 6 or 7 episodes that I've recorded, and I would love it if you guys really let me know what you think about these different formats that you're trying out, or that we're trying out rather. Done some blind listen shows, I did a solo show, some single series focused shows, some shows that are much more loosely based, obviously the Dyad Challenge here, which is a brand new kind of show that we're doing, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about the formats, so please let us know about that stuff. And you can look forward to more episodes soon with more guests and more incredible music. Also, an update on the Patreon. I'm pretty sure by this point I should have it up. I will have details in the show notes if I do, along with some cool tiers and some cool ways that you guys can participate in future episodes like blind listens, etc. So once again, Ben, thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to more episodes of anything that you do, dissertations or the Dyad Presents in the future.
Thanks.
All right, guys, so we will see you next time on the VG Embassy. Take care. We'll see you later.